The Arizona sun blazed down on Republic like the judgment of God himself, and Sarah Kelly stood at the center of it all, waiting to be destroyed. 22 years old, blonde hair matted with jail grime, blue eyes that had seen too much betrayal in too short a time. The wooden platform in the town square wasn't just a stage. It was an altar where they planned to sacrifice her reputation, her future, everything she had left. And the worst part, she hadn't done a damn thing wrong. "Time to go, Miss Kelly." Sheriff Wilson's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the voice of a man doing his job, blind to whether justice was actually being served. Sarah lifted her chin despite every instinct screaming at her to collapse, to beg, to run. "I didn't steal anything," she said one more time, knowing it wouldn't matter. It never mattered. The accusations had come like a flash flood. $20 missing from Hollister's general store, the money planted in her Bible at the boarding house, her protests drowning in a town that had already decided her guilt. She was an outsider. She had no family. She had secrets she couldn't share. That made her the perfect scapegoat, and everyone in Republic knew it. When the jailhouse door swung open, the roar of the crowd hit her like a physical force. They wanted blood. They wanted vindication. They wanted someone to blame for all the theft and uncertainty that had been plaguing their town. And Sarah Kelly, the strange woman who'd arrived 3 months ago with no references and a mysterious past, was their chosen sacrifice. Mayor Thornton stood on the platform, his massive gut straining against his vest, jowls quivering with self-righteous fury. Beside him stood Edwin Hollister, the store owner who'd accused her, watching with cold eyes that promised nothing but destruction. The sign they planned to hang around her neck sat waiting on a chair, "Thief" painted in crude black letters. But they had no idea what was about to happen. At the edge of the crowd, a tall cowboy with weathered features and gray eyes sharp as broken glass watched the proceedings with growing disgust. Zachary Young had been in Republic for exactly 2 days, just passing through on his way north with a cattle herd. He'd heard the gossip about the thieving woman in jail, and something about the story had felt wrong from the moment he'd heard it. Now, seeing Sarah's face, the fear mixed with stubborn dignity, the way she refused to bow even as they prepared to humiliate her, something clicked into place. This wasn't justice. This was a lynching without a rope. "Citizens of Republic," Mayor Thornton bellowed, raising his hands for silence. "We are gathered to pass judgment on Sarah Kelly, accused of theft from our most respected merchant. $20 was found hidden in her room. The evidence is irrefutable." "It was planted." Sarah's voice rang out clear and desperate. "I never took anything." The crowd exploded with derisive laughter. "Liar!" someone shouted. "She's probably worse than a thief," a woman called out. "Did you see how she looked at my husband?" The accusations multiplied, growing wilder by the second. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about her being a single woman, alone, vulnerable, different. They were going to tear her apart, and there wasn't a soul in Republic who would lift a finger to stop them. Except one. "This is a mockery of justice." The voice cut through the crowd's noise like a knife through silk, and every head turned to see who'd dare interrupt the mayor's grand performance. Zach stepped forward, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip, his eyes hard as steel. "You folks ought to be ashamed of yourselves." The crowd went dead silent. Mayor Thornton's face turned purple. "Who are you to question?" "Name's Zachary Young," Zach said evenly, his voice carrying across the square with quiet authority. "And I'm questioning it because it stinks worse than a week-old carcass in the summer sun." Sarah stared at the stranger, hope fluttering in her chest for the first time in days. Who was this man? Why was he defending her when everyone else wanted her destroyed? "Mr. Young," Hollister spoke up, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a town matter. You do well to mind your own business." Zach's gaze shifted to the storekeeper, taking in the expensive suit and gold watch chain. "Funny thing about justice," he said slowly. "It ought to be everybody's business." He turned to address the crowd directly. "You're all so quick to condemn this young woman. Has anyone bothered to ask why $20 would mean so much to her that she'd risk everything to steal it?" Some people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Doubt was creeping in like smoke under a door. "The evidence speaks for itself," Hollister insisted, but there was a nervous edge to his voice now. "Does it?" Zach challenged. "Because from where I stand, it looks mighty convenient. Almost as convenient as nobody mentioning the $300 that went missing from the bank last month." He paused, letting that sink in. "Seems like you've got a real problem with disappearing money in this town. Makes a man wonder if you're just looking for an easy scapegoat." The murmur that rippled through the crowd was different now, uncertain, questioning. Sarah watched in amazement as this stranger systematically dismantled the case against her with nothing but logic and a willingness to speak truth to power. "This whole proceeding is nothing but a circus," Zach continued, his voice ringing with conviction. "You've condemned this woman without a proper trial, based on evidence that could easily have been planted, and now you want to shame her publicly before running her out of town. That's not justice, that's cowardice." "How dare you?" Mayor Thornton sputtered. "Sheriff, remove this man." But before Sheriff Wilson could move, Zach said something that changed everything. "Before you do that, Sheriff, you might want to consider why Mr. Hollister is so eager to see Miss Kelly gone. Perhaps because she knows something about those account books she was helping to keep." He fixed Hollister with a penetrating stare. "Isn't that right?" Hollister's face went white as chalk. "This is outrageous. I won't stand here and be slandered." "Then don't stand there," Zach interrupted. His next words came out calm and clear, but they hit the crowd like thunder. "Watch me marry her instead." The collective gasp was audible across 3 counties. Sarah's mouth fell open in shock. The mayor looked like he might have a stroke. And Zach Young just stood there, calm as a summer morning, waiting for the chaos to settle. "What did you say?" Mayor Thornton finally managed to sputter. "You heard me," Zach replied. He turned to Sarah, his expression softening as he met her bewildered gaze. "Miss Kelly, I know this is sudden and unconventional, but I believe in your innocence, and I won't stand by while you're treated unjustly. Will you marry me and give us the chance to prove these accusations false?" Sarah's mind was spinning. This was insane. This was impossible. This stranger, this handsome, brave, utterly mad stranger, was offering her not just escape from humiliation, but a chance to fight back, to clear her name, to prove her innocence. What choice did she have? "Yes," she heard herself say, her voice stronger than she expected. "I will." The crowd erupted. Some shouted in outrage, others in confusion, a few in grudging admiration for the boldness of the move. Mayor Thornton looked apoplectic. Hollister appeared ready to commit murder right there in the square. But Zach Young just smiled and held out his hand to Sarah. "Is there a preacher present?" he called out. After a long, uncertain moment, Reverend Harris stepped forward from the crowd, looking thoroughly bewildered. "I am here, though I must say this is most irregular." "These are irregular circumstances, Reverend," Zach replied. "But I believe God favors justice and truth. Will you marry us?" The Reverend glanced between the fuming town officials and the determined cowboy. "If both parties are willing and of age, and proper documentation can be provided." "We are," Sarah said firmly, stepping down from the platform to stand beside Zach. Up close, she could see the kindness in his eyes, the steadiness that somehow made this wild gamble seem less terrifying. "My papers are at the boarding house. Sheriff Wilson can fetch them." The sheriff, looking relieved to have an excuse to escape the increasingly volatile situation, nodded and hurried off. While they waited, Sarah could feel the crowd's mood shifting, some still hostile, but others beginning to see this as the extraordinary story it was. A few women were even looking at Zack with undisguised admiration. When Sheriff Wilson returned with Sarah's documents, Reverend Harris examined them carefully, then checked Zack's identification. Finding everything in order, he reluctantly agreed to proceed. And so, in the very square where Sarah was to have been publicly shamed, she instead found herself exchanging vows with a man she had met only minutes before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present, least of all Sarah herself. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Harris concluded, his voice uncertain but official, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Young, you may kiss your bride." Zack hesitated, his eyes searching Sarah's face. This was the moment where their impromptu charade would become tangible, real. Sarah gave him a small, nervous nod, and his kiss was gentle and brief, a mere brush of lips that somehow managed to convey both respect and reassurance. When he drew back, Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks, but also a strange sense of security she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. "Well now," Zack said, turning to face the stunned town officials. "As Miss Kelly, or rather Mrs. Young, is now my lawful wife, I believe any charges against her affect me directly. Sheriff, I formally request a full investigation into the theft, with proper evidence presented before a judge." Sheriff Wilson, who had been watching with growing unease, nodded slowly. "That's your right, Mr. Young." "This is absurd," Hollister exploded. "Sheriff, surely—" "The marriage is legal and binding," the sheriff interrupted, his voice firm for the first time that day. "And Mr. Young is within his rights to demand due process for his wife." Mayor Thornton, seeing the situation had spiraled completely beyond his control, attempted to salvage some dignity. "Very well. Until the judge arrives, Mrs. Young will remain under the supervision of her husband." He spat the word like poison. "But mark my words, this isn't over." As the crowd began to disperse, muttering and speculating wildly, Zack placed a protective hand at the small of Sarah's back and guided her away from the platform. "I believe we've given the good people of Republic enough to gossip about for one day," he said quietly. "Let's get you somewhere you can rest and clean up." Sarah looked up at him, still dazed by the rapid turn of events. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Young." "Zack," he corrected gently, "and there's no need for thanks. What they were doing wasn't right. But to marry me, a complete stranger—" Sarah shook her head in wonder. "You've tied yourself to me, to my troubles." A smile touched his lips, softening the hard angles of his face. "Let's just say, I've got a keen eye for trouble that doesn't fit the story being told, and everything about this situation felt wrong." His expression grew serious. "I meant what I said about getting to the truth, Sarah. If you'll trust me, we'll clear your name together." As they walked down the street, acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them, Sarah felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. She had just married a man she knew nothing about, a man who might come to regret his impulsive act of chivalry. Yet something in Zack's steady gaze and quiet confidence made her believe that perhaps, against all odds, this bizarre twist of fate might lead to the justice she'd been denied. What neither of them knew was that their hastily formed alliance would not only challenge the corruption festering beneath Republic's respectable facade, but would forge a bond between them that would transcend their unconventional beginning. And the real fight was only just beginning. The small room at the Republic Hotel felt like paradise after a week in jail. It wasn't much, just a bed, a washstand, a writing desk, and a wardrobe. But to Sarah, it was freedom. Zack had insisted on paying for separate accommodations, making it clear to both her and the tight-lipped hotel clerk that he would take the adjoining room. "A hasty wedding doesn't change the fact that we're strangers," he'd explained quietly. "You'll have your privacy, Mrs. Young." Mrs. Young. The name still sounded foreign, impossible. She was a married woman now, legally bound to this enigmatic cowboy who had swept into her life like a dust storm and changed everything in a matter of minutes. After washing away the grime of jail and changing into a clean dress, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process her new reality. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, it's Zach. May I come in? We should talk." She smoothed her damp hair and straightened her shoulders. "Yes, please do." When he entered, he'd also cleaned up, his dark hair damp at the temples, wearing a fresh shirt. Without the layer of trail dust, he looked younger, though the weathered lines around his eyes spoke of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors, facing hard truths. "Feeling better?" he asked, pulling the desk chair over to sit facing her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Much. Thank you for, well, everything." He nodded. "We need to talk about what happens next. I'll need to know everything if I'm going to help you prove your innocence." Sarah hesitated. Years of guarded living made her instinctively wary of revealing too much. Yet this man had already risked himself for her, had legally bound himself to her fate. If she couldn't trust him now, when could she? "I came to Republic 3 months ago from Santa Fe," she began. "I needed a fresh start somewhere no one knew me. Mr. Hollister was advertising for help. I have experience with bookkeeping. At first, everything was fine." She frowned. Then things started to change. "What kind of things?" "About 2 weeks ago, I noticed discrepancies in the ledgers. Deliveries recorded, but never received. Payments to suppliers who don't exist. When I mentioned it to Mr. Hollister, thinking I was being helpful, he became very angry, told me to stick to my assigned tasks." She twisted her hands in her lap. "3 days later, I was arrested. They found the money in my room, hidden in my Bible." "Convenient," Zach said, his expression darkening. "Sounds like Hollister was cooking his books, got worried when you started asking questions. Framing you for theft was a good way to discredit anything you might say and get rid of you in one move." "That's what I think too," Sarah agreed, relief washing over her that he believed her. "But I can't prove it." Zach was silent for a moment, thinking. "We need to see those books, and we need to find out more about Hollister's business dealings." He leaned forward. "Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. This marriage of ours. It's not real," she said quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. "I understand that. It was a strategy to buy us time. Once my name is cleared, we can seek an annulment." Something flickered in Zach's eyes. "That would be the sensible course. But until then, we need to present ourselves as a genuine married couple. The town will be watching closely." "Of course. I can play the part convincingly." "I don't doubt it." His expression grew serious. "But I should warn you, stirring up trouble like this could be dangerous. If Hollister and his friends are involved in something illegal, they won't give up easily." "I know," she said softly. "But I can't run away again. Not this time." The determination in her voice seemed to please him. "Then we stand together." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's one more thing. I wasn't entirely truthful about who I am." Sarah tensed. "What do you mean?" "I am Zachary Young, and I am a cattleman. But I've also worked as a Pinkerton agent for the past 5 years. I was passing through Republic on my way back from an assignment when I heard about your situation." Sarah stared at him in astonishment. "A detective? You're a detective?" He nodded. "I probably should have mentioned it sooner, but people tend to be less forthcoming when they know they're talking to a Pinkerton." "So you didn't just act on impulse this morning," Sarah said slowly. You suspected something wasn't right because you're trained to notice such things. The impulse to marry you was genuine enough, Zack admitted with a wry smile. I hadn't planned that part. But yes, my instincts were telling me there was more to your story than simple theft. He paused. Does this change things for you? Sarah considered the question. A Pinkerton detective was certainly better equipped to help her than a regular cowboy. But it also meant Zack had been withholding information, making her wonder what else he might not be telling her. No, she decided finally. It doesn't change that you helped me when no one else would. If anything, it gives me more confidence we can get to the truth. Relief visibly washed over Zack's features. Good. We'll talk more in the morning. Good night, Sarah. Good night, husband, she replied, testing the word on her tongue. Something shifted in his gaze at the term, a momentary intensity that made her breath catch. Then he nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and slipped out the door, leaving Sarah alone, with thoughts far more complicated than they had been an hour before. As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Yesterday she'd been facing exile and shame. Today she was a married woman, with a Pinkerton detective for a husband, embarking on an investigation into some of the most powerful men in Republic. And somewhere beneath her anxiety and determination, a small traitorous part of her couldn't help but notice how her pulse had quickened when Zack looked at her with those serious gray eyes. How safe she'd felt with his hand at the small of her back. Dangerous thoughts. This marriage was a means to an end, nothing more. She would do well to remember that, no matter how handsome or kind her unexpected husband might be. But as she blew out the lamp and settled into bed, she couldn't quite convince herself that was the whole truth. The following morning, Sarah woke early and dressed carefully in her better blue calico dress. Today would be her first appearance in Republic as Mrs. Young, and she was determined to present herself with dignity. A knock at precisely 7 announced Zack's arrival. When she opened the door, she found him similarly prepared. Clean clothes that were a step above trail-worn attire, his dark hair neatly combed. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I thought we might have breakfast at the hotel restaurant, make our first public appearance as a married couple." Sarah nodded, understanding the strategy. The faster we establish ourselves as legitimate, the sooner people will start talking freely around us. Exactly. He offered his arm. "Shall we, Mrs. Young?" She placed her hand on his forearm, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath her fingers. "Lead on, Mr. Young." The hotel restaurant was already bustling with the morning crowd. Their entrance caused an immediate stir, conversations faltering, heads turning as the scandalous newlyweds made their appearance. Zack guided Sarah to a table near the center of the room, conspicuously helping with her chair and taking the seat beside her rather than across from her. A clear statement of their supposed intimacy. He placed his hand over hers on the table, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "Half the town will know we had breakfast together before we finish our coffee," he murmured. "That's what we want, isn't it?" Sarah replied, her lips curved in a smile, though her heart was racing. "It is." He paused. "Though I apologize in advance for the liberties I'll need to take to maintain the illusion." Before Sarah could respond, a waitress approached, her curiosity poorly disguised. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Young. What can I get for you?" Zack ordered for both of them with the easy confidence of a husband who knew his wife's preferences. Sarah played along, smiling gratefully, and adding only a small request for extra jam. As they waited for their food, Zack kept up a stream of quiet conversation, much of it meaningless but designed to look intimate to observers. He would occasionally brush a strand of hair from her face or lean in to whisper something that made her smile or blush, building a picture of newlyweds still captivated by each other. "You're quite good at this," Sarah observed during one such moment. A shadow crossed his face briefly. "I've had practice playing roles in my work." Their breakfast arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. As they ate, Sarah could feel the weight of curious stares, could hear the whispers reaching her ears, speculation about their hasty marriage, doubts about her innocence, questions about what a Pinkerton wanted with a suspected thief. Then the restaurant door opened and Edwin Hollister himself entered, accompanied by Mayor Thornton. The two men spotted them immediately, their expressions darkening with barely concealed hostility. After a brief consultation, they approached the table, standing over the seated couple with the unmistakable posture of men used to intimidation. "Mr. Young, Mrs. Young," Mayor Thornton said, the courtesy sounding like an insult. "I trust you found your accommodation satisfactory." "Very much so," Zack replied pleasantly, though Sarah could feel the tension coiled in him. "Republic has a fine hotel." "We pride ourselves on civilization here," Hollister said coldly. "Which is why yesterday's spectacle was so disappointing." "I couldn't agree more, Mr. Hollister," Zack said mildly. "Public shaming without proper trial is hardly civilized." Hollister's face flushed with anger. "The evidence is irrefutable. Your wife was caught red-handed." "Found in possession is not the same as caught in the act," Zack pointed out. "And as I recall, the money appeared under suspicious circumstances. I'm looking forward to the circuit judge's arrival so we can examine all the facts properly." Mayor Thornton cleared his throat. "About that, we've received word that Judge Hamilton won't be able to make it to Republic for at least 2 weeks." Sarah's heart sank. 2 weeks was a long time to maintain their charade, a long time for Hollister and his allies to find ways to discredit her further. But Zack merely nodded. "That's unfortunate, but not surprising. In the meantime, perhaps Mrs. Young might even resume her position at your store, Mr. Hollister. She speaks very highly of the organizational system she implemented." The suggestion hit its mark. Hollister blanched visibly before his face darkened with anger. "That would be inappropriate. And speaking of inappropriate, one might question your judgment in marrying a woman accused of theft." "When you meet the right woman, Mr. Hollister, you know it immediately," Zack replied, lifting Sarah's hand to his lips in a gesture that sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Sometimes fate works in mysterious ways." Mayor Thornton snorted. "Indeed. Well, we won't keep you, but be advised, Mr. Young, that any attempt to interfere with town business will be met with the full force of the law." "I would expect nothing less," Zack said, his tone pleasant, though his eyes had hardened. "The law should apply equally to everyone, after all." The implied challenge hung in the air. Finally, with stiff nods, Hollister and Thornton withdrew to a table across the restaurant where they could observe while conducting their own heated conversation. "They're worried," Sarah said quietly once the men were out of earshot. "As they should be," Zack agreed. "Hollister practically confirmed our suspicions with his reaction. He's hiding something in those books, and he's terrified you might expose it." He took a sip of his coffee. 2 weeks gives us plenty of time to investigate quietly. They could also use that time to fabricate more evidence against me." Zack's hand closed reassuringly over hers. "That's why we won't wait for them to make the next move. Today, we start asking questions, building our own case." His eyes met hers. "Trust me, Sarah. By the time Judge Hamilton arrives, we'll know exactly what Hollister and his friends are hiding." Something in his quiet confidence steadied her. She turned her hand beneath his so their palms met, fingers interlacing in a gesture that felt more genuine than all their earlier play-acting. "I do trust you," she said softly, surprising herself with the truth of it. Zack's eyes widened slightly at the sincerity in her voice, at the way her fingers had willingly tangled with his. For a moment, the role he was playing seemed to slip, revealing something raw and honest beneath. Then he squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Then let's finish breakfast and begin. I'm eager to show my bride the town where we'll be starting our new life together." The words were for their audience, but as Sarah met his gaze, she couldn't help wondering if someday, in some way she couldn't yet imagine, they might hold a grain of truth. And that possibility was more terrifying and thrilling than anything else she'd faced. The next week passed in a carefully choreographed dance. Each morning they breakfasted together at the hotel restaurant, making sure they were seen behaving like devoted newlyweds. Then they would separate, Zach to visit local businesses and strike up casual conversations, Sarah to make cautious overtures to the few women in town who seemed sympathetic. Mrs. Leary, Sarah's former landlady, proved invaluable. When Sarah visited with Zach, the older woman was quick to soften. "I always thought there was something fishy about the whole business," Mrs. Leary confided over tea. "That sheriff tearing your room apart like they knew exactly where to look. Found that money awful quick. Did you notice anyone unusual entering the boarding house beforehand?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Leary's eyes narrowed. "Now that you mention it, I did see Mr. Prescott from the bank here one afternoon. Said he was looking for one of the other boarders, but he seemed mighty interested in which room was yours." Zach and Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance. Another connection between the three men they suspected. "Have you noticed anything unusual about their business dealings?" Zach asked carefully. The landlady leaned forward, lowering her voice. "They meet every Thursday evening at Prescott's house. All three of them. Been doing it for months, always very secretive about it." "Interesting," Zach murmured. "And has Republic seen any significant new developments recently? Construction projects, land deals?" "Well, there's been talk of the railroad extending a spur line here," Mrs. Leary said. "Nothing official yet, but rumor has it some big company back east is interested in our silver deposits." Another piece clicked into place. If someone knew in advance about railroad plans, they could buy up land along the proposed route and make a fortune when prices soared. "Mrs. Leary, you've been enormously helpful," Zach said warmly. "But I must ask you to keep our conversation private. My wife's safety depends on discretion." The landlady nodded solemnly. "You can count on me, Mr. Young." As they left the boarding house, Zach and Sarah discussed their findings. "The railroad connection makes sense," Zach said quietly. "If they had inside information, they could be buying land through dummy corporations. That would require substantial capital, which might explain the missing money. And the ledgers I was organizing would show the irregular withdrawals," Sarah added. No wonder Hollister panicked. "We need to see those books," Zach said. His expression grew determined. "Tonight, after the town is asleep, we pay an after-hours visit to Hollister's store." Sarah's eyes widened. "Breaking and entering." "It's not breaking if we have a key," he pointed out. "And as for entering, you technically still work there, don't you? You were never formally dismissed. That's splitting hairs very finely. Sometimes that's what justice requires." His expression grew serious. "I won't force you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, Sarah. But if we want to clear your name, we need proof." Sarah considered this. The men who'd framed her deserved to be exposed. "All right, we go tonight." Zach's hand covered hers. "I won't let anything happen to you. Whatever else happens, you have my word on that." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Then we'll go together." As they continued their walk, neither noticed the shadowy figure that had been following them, nor did they see him slip away to report what he'd overheard. Night fell over Republic with desert suddenness. Sarah paced her hotel room, checking the clock every few minutes. Zach had instructed her to wait until midnight, when the town would be asleep. She'd changed into dark clothes, practical attire that wouldn't make noise. In her pocket was a small knife Zach had given her, just in case. At precisely midnight, the expected knock came. Sarah opened the door, to find Zack similarly dressed in dark clothes, his gun belt buckled around his waist. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "As I'll ever be." They slipped out through Zack's room, which had a window opening onto the side alley. Moving in shadows, they made their way to the rear of Hollister's general store. "Stay close," Zack murmured. "If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. No arguments." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it must be audible. Zack examined the back window, then produced a thin blade and manipulated the latch until it gave with a soft click. "Impressive," she whispered. He flashed her a quick grin. "One of many useful skills. Ladies first." They climbed through, Zack closing the window behind them until it was open just a crack for hasty exit if needed. The store was eerie in darkness, familiar shapes transformed into looming shadows. "His office is through that door," Sarah whispered. "The cabinet with the ledgers is on the right wall." They moved cautiously through the store. The office door was unlocked. Hollister apparently saw no need to secure it when the store itself was locked. Sarah went directly to the tall cabinet while Zack found the key in the desk drawer, exactly where she'd indicated. "Here," she said softly, opening the cabinet to reveal neatly organized ledgers. "We need the most recent ones," Zack said, producing a small shielded lantern. "And probably the ones from when you first started noticing discrepancies." They worked in silence, Sarah flipping through pages with practiced efficiency, Zack taking notes. "Here," Sarah said suddenly. "This delivery payment is nearly double what it should be. And here, another payment to the same company, but we didn't receive a shipment that week. And these payments to companies I've never heard of," Zack added, examining entries. "Johnson & Sons, Western Mercantile Associates." "None of those were regular suppliers," Sarah confirmed. "I remember thinking it was odd." "Shell companies they created to funnel money through," Zack suggested. "If we could cross-reference with bank records." A floorboard creaked somewhere in the main store. Both of them froze, eyes meeting in alarm. "Someone's here," Zack whispered, immediately extinguishing the lantern. "Quick, gather the most important ledgers. We need to go." Sarah hastily collected books containing the most damning evidence, clutching them to her chest as Zack drew his revolver and moved to the office door. He peered through the crack, then jerked back. "3 men," he breathed in her ear. "Armed. We can't go back the way we came." Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. Then she remembered. "There's a back staircase. It leads up to Hollister's apartment. There's a fire escape from the second floor." "Show me." Heart hammering, Sarah led him to a narrow door hidden behind crates. It opened onto a steep staircase ascending into darkness. They slipped through, Zack closing the door silently behind them. Below, they could hear voices growing louder. "Someone's been here," a gruff voice, Sheriff Wilson's, declared. "Recently." "Find them," came Hollister's unmistakable command. "They can't have gone far." Zack and Sarah reached the top of the stairs, emerging into a storage room adjacent to Hollister's living quarters. Through a partially open door, they could see a darkened hallway. "The fire escape?" Zack questioned urgently. "Through the bedroom at the end of the hall." They moved swiftly, the sounds of searching men spurring them on. The bedroom door was ajar. They slipped inside and immediately spotted the window opening onto the metal fire escape. Zack went first, helping Sarah through and taking the ledgers so she could manage her skirts. The metal grating felt precarious beneath their feet, rattling with each movement. They'd almost reached the bottom when a shout came from above. "There! They're on the fire escape!" A gunshot cracked through the night, the bullet ricocheting off the metal railing inches from Sarah's head. She gasped, nearly losing her footing. "Run!" Zack commanded, pushing her ahead as they reached the ground. "Head for the livery stable." They sprinted down the alley, Zach keeping himself between Sarah and their pursuers. More shots rang out, but they were moving targets in darkness. They reached the livery stable, and Zach immediately began saddling his black gelding. "We have to leave town. They know it was us. They'll come after us with everything they have." "But the judge—" "We'll meet him in Tucson," Zach interrupted. "With these ledgers and what we've learned, we have enough to bring a case. But if we stay tonight, we might not live to see morning." The reality hit Sarah with full force. In the space of an hour, she'd gone from suspected thief to fugitive fleeing for her life. And yet, clutching the evidence of true crimes, she felt more righteous than afraid. "All right," she agreed. "Tucson it is." Zach finished saddling, then helped Sarah mount. She settled into the saddle, making room for him to swing up behind her. The ledgers were secured in saddlebags, along with essential supplies. "Hold tight," he instructed, his arms circling her waist. "Once we clear town, we ride hard." They left the stable quietly, keeping to shadows as they made their way to the edge of town. Once past the last buildings, Zach urged the horse into a gallop, and they rode into the desert night. Sarah leaned back against Zach's solid chest, drawing strength from his presence. Her life had changed irrevocably the moment he'd stepped forward in the town square. Now, fleeing into the unknown with him, the ledgers that would clear her name secure in their possession, she felt more alive than she had in years. The rhythm of the horse beneath them, the vast starlit sky above, Zach's protective arm around her waist. In this moment, it was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they were free, and they were together. Dawn found them sheltering in a small canyon about 15 miles southeast of Republic. They'd ridden hard through the night, and even Zach's sturdy horse needed rest. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Zach decided, helping Sarah dismount. Her legs trembled, unaccustomed to such prolonged riding. "The horse needs water, and so do we." The canyon offered natural protection and good visibility of the surrounding area. A small spring provided fresh water. Zach unsaddled and rubbed down his horse before securing it near the spring. Sarah, meanwhile, sorted through the ledgers, ensuring they had enough evidence. "These 3 books contain the most obvious discrepancies," she told Zach when he joined her. "The pattern is clear. They've been siphoning money for at least 6 months." Zach examined the pages she indicated. "And based on what we learned about the railroad, they're likely using that money to buy land along the proposed route." He shook his head in disgust. Small-town corruption at its finest. "And they were willing to destroy my life to protect their scheme," Sarah said, anger flaring. Zach's expression softened as he looked at her. "You didn't deserve any of that. But if it's any consolation, their plan is falling apart now." Sarah nodded, then a wave of exhaustion washed over her. She swayed slightly. "You need to rest," Zach said gently. He spread his bedroll on the ground and insisted Sarah use it while he kept watch. Too tired to argue, she lay down. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as questions circled in her mind. "Zach," she said softly, "what happens after? After we reach Tucson and present the evidence, I mean." He was silent for a long moment. "I hope Hollister and his friends will be arrested, tried. Your name will be cleared. And us? This marriage of convenience?" She couldn't quite finish the thought, unsure what answer she was hoping for. Zach shifted, his profile outlined against the lightening sky. "That's for you to decide, Sarah. The marriage served its purpose. If you want an annulment afterward, I'll understand." There was something in his voice, a careful neutrality that concealed rather than revealed his true feelings. Sarah propped herself up. "Is that what you want?" He turned to face her, conflict evident in his eyes. What I want is for you to be happy and free with your reputation restored." He paused. "But if you're asking if I desire the annulment for my own sake," he struggled with his words. "No, that's not what I want." The confession hung in the air between them. "These past days with you, Sarah, pretending to be your husband has been the easiest role I've ever played. Too easy. I find myself forgetting sometimes that it isn't real." Sarah's breath caught. "I forget too," she whispered. "And that scares me, Zach. I've been alone for so long, trusting only myself. How do I know what I feel is real, and not just gratitude?" Zach reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with exquisite tenderness. "You don't. Neither of us can know that yet. We met under extraordinary circumstances. We're forced into an intimacy most couples take months to develop." He paused. "There's no map for this, Sarah." "Then what do we do?" His hand came to rest against her cheek. "We give ourselves time. After Tucson, after your name is cleared, we take the space to discover who we are together when we're not running for our lives." A smile touched his lips. "If you're willing to try." In that moment, with the first golden light of dawn washing over them, the future seemed full of possibility rather than fear. Sarah placed her hand over his, where it rested against her cheek. "I'm willing to try." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like the sunrise itself, warm and full of promise. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her the chance to pull away. Instead, Sarah closed the distance between them. Their kiss was nothing like the brief performative touches they'd shared in Republic. This was real, tender at first, then deepening as Sarah's hand moved to Zach's shoulder, drawing him closer. His arms circled her waist, and for a suspended moment, there was only this: the warmth of his lips on hers, the solid strength of him, the quiet sounds of the desert awakening around them. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Sarah felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. The pretense was gone, leaving only truth in its wake. "We should rest," Zach said, his voice husky. "A few hours of sleep, then we continue to Tucson." Sarah nodded, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they'd just shared. She lay back down, but this time Zach settled beside her, his arm a protective weight across her waist, his chest warm against her back. It should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt right, as if they'd been sleeping this way for years. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was that whatever happened in Tucson, whatever the future held, this moment was worth all the uncertainty that had preceded it. They reached Tucson 2 days later, dusty and weary, but determined. The journey had been challenging, pushing hard during daylight, camping in concealed locations at night, always wary of pursuit. But it had also cemented something between them, a partnership that went beyond their legal status. The city was larger than Republic, bustling with frontier energy. They made their way directly to the courthouse, where they learned Judge Hamilton was in session that very day. "We need to see him urgently," Zach explained to the clerk, showing his Pinkerton credentials. "It's a matter involving corruption and fraud in Republic." The mention of the Pinkerton agency worked its usual magic. Within the hour, they were seated in Judge Hamilton's chambers, the ledgers spread on his desk as they explained everything. Judge Hamilton was a stern-looking man in his 60s, with bushy white eyebrows that drew together as he listened. He examined the ledgers carefully, asking occasional sharp questions. "This is serious indeed," he said finally. "Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction of justice." He shook his head. "And to frame an innocent woman, will it be enough to clear my name?" Sarah asked anxiously. The judge nodded slowly. "The evidence in these ledgers, combined with your testimony and Mr. Young's status as a Pinkerton, should be more than sufficient to issue arrest warrants for Hollister, Thornton, and Prescott. He fixed his gaze on Sarah. As for clearing your name, Mrs. Young, consider it done. I'll issue a formal statement exonerating you of all charges. Relief washed over Sarah in a dizzying wave. After months of living under suspicion, justice was finally within reach. She felt Zach's hand close around hers, a silent gesture of support and shared triumph. "What happens now?" Zach asked. "I'll dispatch U.S. Marshals to Republic immediately to arrest the three men and bring them to Tucson for trial," Judge Hamilton replied. "Given the seriousness of the charges, I have no doubt they will be convicted." He fixed them both with a penetrating gaze. "I must advise you, however, that it would be unwise to return to Republic until after the arrests have been made. These men have proven themselves desperate and dangerous." "We understand," Zach assured him. "We'll stay in Tucson until it's safe." As they left the courthouse, stepping into bright afternoon sunlight, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. The burden of false accusation had been lifted. "We did it," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "We actually did it." Zach smiled back. "You did it, Sarah. Your courage, your sharp eye for those discrepancies, that's what brought them down." "We did it together," she insisted, squeezing his hand. They walked through Tucson's busy streets, still holding hands, no longer playing roles, but simply being themselves. "We should find somewhere to stay," Zach suggested. "It could be a week or more before it's safe to return to Republic, if that's what you want to do." Sarah considered. Return to Republic, where she'd faced such humiliation. Yet there was unfinished business there. Her possessions, perhaps most importantly, the chance to see her accusers brought to justice. "I think we should go back eventually," she decided. "Not to stay necessarily, but to properly end that chapter. To see it through." She glanced at Zach. "Unless you have other plans, your work with the Pinkerton Agency." "My current assignment is complete," he said. "I have some flexibility." His expression grew serious. "But Sarah, there's something we need to discuss. Our marriage." They'd reached a small plaza where a fountain splashed in the center. Zach led her to a bench partially shaded by a mesquite tree. "We agreed to give ourselves time," he began. "That still stands. But there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" Zach took a deep breath. "The night before I came to Republic, I had a dream. A vivid dream about a woman with honey blonde hair and blue eyes who was in terrible trouble, who needed someone to believe in her." He shook his head slightly. "I've never been one for superstition, but when I rode into town the next morning and heard about the thieving woman in jail, something told me I needed to see for myself." He took her hands in his. "When I saw you standing on that platform, it was like recognizing someone I'd known all my life. The woman from my dream. I can't explain it, Sarah. And I didn't tell you because I feared you'd think I was mad." He paused. "But I need you to know that when I offered to marry you, it wasn't just about justice. There was something more, something I don't fully understand even now." Sarah stared at him, astonished. She thought back to that moment in the town square, how his eyes had locked with hers across the crowd, the immediate sense of connection despite her fear. "I felt it too," she admitted softly. "When you spoke up for me, it was as if a voice inside said, 'This man is important. This moment matters.' I thought it was just relief, but maybe it was something more." A smile touched Zach's lips. "Maybe it was. I'm not sure I believe in fate, but I do know that finding you, helping you, it's the most right thing I've ever done." He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her hands. "And these past days, pretending to be your husband." He paused. "I don't want to pretend anymore, Sarah. I want it to be real." Her breath caught. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, he stated simply, honestly. And I'm asking if you might consider giving our marriage a genuine chance, not just as a temporary arrangement, but as a true partnership. He paused. If you need more time, I understand. If you decide it's not what you want, I'll respect that. But I wanted you to know where I stand. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming emotion. In the space of a week, she'd gone from facing public shame to being exonerated. And now this, an offer of love from a man who'd risked everything to help her, who'd seen her at her lowest and still found something worth fighting for. Zach, she began, her voice wavering. When you stepped forward in that square, you saved me in more ways than you know. Not just from immediate danger, but from the despair I'd been carrying, the belief that I was destined to be alone, always running. She squeezed his hands tightly. These past days have been extraordinary, but the most extraordinary discovery has been you. Your courage, your integrity, your kindness. She took a steadying breath. I'm falling in love with you too. And yes, I want our marriage to be real. Not because I feel obligated, though I am deeply grateful, but because I believe we found each other for a reason. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally where I belong. The joy that broke across Zach's face was like sunshine after a storm. He leaned forward, cradling her face in his hands as if she were infinitely precious, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best way. When they parted, they remained close, foreheads touching, sharing breath and the moment of profound connection. Around them, life in Tucson continued, people passing, horses clattering, the fountain splashing. But for Zach and Sarah, there was only this circle of newfound certainty, this promise of a future together. So, Zach said softly, a smile in his voice, Mrs. Young, my real Mrs. Young, what shall we do with this new beginning? Sarah smiled back, feeling a lightness that had been absent for too long. First, we find somewhere to stay while we wait for the marshals. Then, when it's safe, we return to Republic to collect my things and witness justice being served. And after that, she considered. After that, I think we decide together. You have your work with the Pinkerton Agency. Perhaps I could accompany you sometimes, use my skills to help, or perhaps we find a place to call our own, somewhere to build a life between your assignments. I like the sound of that, Zach agreed. All of it, especially the together part. As they rose from the bench, hand in hand once more, Sarah felt possibility unfolding before them, a future not defined by secrets or shame, but by truth and trust, and a love that had sparked in the most unlikely of circumstances. Walking through the streets of Tucson with her husband, her true husband in heart as well as law, Sarah Kelly Young felt that the next chapter of her story might be the best one yet. 2 weeks later, Zach and Sarah stood at the edge of Republic's main street, watching as U.S. Marshals escorted Edwin Hollister, Mayor Thornton, and Harold Prescott, all in handcuffs, toward the waiting prison wagon. The three men looked diminished somehow, their arrogance replaced by sullen resignation. Word of the arrests and the reasons behind them had spread through Republic like wildfire. The townspeople had gathered once again in the square, but this time to witness the downfall of men they trusted. The mood was somber, tinged with anger and betrayal, as the full extent of the corruption was revealed. Sarah felt Zach's hand tighten around hers as Hollister glanced in their direction, his face contorting with hatred, before a marshal roughly urged him forward. Feels different than I expected, Sarah said quietly. How so? She watched as the wagon began to move. I thought I'd feel more triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just feel sad for the town. These people trusted those men, and that trust was betrayed. Zach nodded. Justice isn't always as satisfying as we hope, but it's necessary all the same. They began walking toward Mrs. Leary's boarding house, where Sarah's possessions were stored. The town had changed, not physically, but in atmosphere. The revelation of such significant corruption had shaken Republic to its core. As they walked, people nodded to them, some offering hesitant smiles or words of greeting. The hostility was gone, replaced by respect, curiosity, and in some cases shame-faced apology. "Mrs. Young," a voice called from behind. They turned to see Sheriff Wilson approaching, his expression contrite. "Madam, Mr. Young, I wanted to speak with you before you leave town." Zack tensed slightly, but Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. "What can we do for you, Sheriff?" The lawman removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "I wanted to apologize, madam. I should have investigated those theft charges more thoroughly. I failed in my duty, and you suffered for it." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah found her lingering resentment softening. "You were following orders from men you believed were honest. Many people were deceived." "That's kind, but it doesn't excuse my failure," Wilson said, straightening his shoulders. "Which is why I've submitted my resignation. Republic deserves a sheriff who will stand up for what's right even when it's difficult." "That's an honorable decision," Zack said, extending his hand. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong." Wilson shook his hand gratefully. "The town council asked me to convey something else. They're offering Mr. Hollister's store to you, Mrs. Young, as compensation. They feel it's only right, given your accounting skills and how you helped expose the fraud." Sarah blinked in surprise, looking up at Zack, who seemed equally taken aback. "That's very generous," she managed. "It's the least they can do," Wilson replied. "The town needs honest business owners now more than ever. Of course, they understand if you have no desire to remain after everything that's happened." "We'll need to discuss it," Zack said diplomatically. "It's a significant decision." The sheriff nodded. "Of course, the offer stands whenever you're ready." He settled his hat back on his head. "I wish you both well, regardless of what you decide. You've done this town a service." As Wilson walked away, Zack and Sarah continued toward the boarding house, both contemplating the unexpected offer. "A general store," Sarah mused. "I certainly know the business well enough, and with honest bookkeeping, it could be quite profitable." "Is that something you'd want?" Zack asked carefully. "To stay in Republic after everything?" Sarah considered as they walked. The town held painful associations, certainly. Yet it also held the memory of their first meeting, of Zack's brave intervention that had changed her life. And there was a certain poetic justice in taking over Hollister's store, transforming it from a front for corruption into an honest business. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "What about your work with the Pinkerton agency? Would you be willing to settle in one place?" Zack smiled. "As it happens, I've been considering a change. The life of a traveling detective has its excitements, but also its loneliness. I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots somewhere." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Especially now that I have someone to put down roots with." The implication sent warmth through Sarah's chest. "So you would consider staying, running the store together?" "I would," Zack confirmed. "Or we could sell it and use the money to start fresh somewhere else, if that would make you happier. San Francisco, Denver, even back east. The choice is ours, Sarah. The choice is ours." Such simple words, yet they represented a freedom Sarah had never expected to find. After years of making decisions alone, of carrying her burdens in solitude, the idea of sharing her future with this remarkable man filled her with joy that transcended any lingering pain. They reached the boarding house, where Mrs. Leary welcomed them with motherly enthusiasm, insisting they stay for tea. As they sat in her cozy parlor, the same room where they'd first gathered information that would bring down Hollister, the conversation naturally turned to their plans. "So you've been offered the store," Mrs. Leary said, pouring tea. "Will you accept?" Sarah glanced at Zach, who gave her an encouraging nod. It was her decision, his expression seemed to say, and he would support her either way. "I think we will," Sarah decided, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Republic deserves a fresh start, and so do we. Perhaps the best way to put the past behind us is to create something new from it." Mrs. Leary beamed. "I was hoping you'd say that. This town needs good people like you two." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "And I happen to know that the lovely little house on Maple Street, you know, the one with the wraparound porch and the rose garden, is coming up for sale next month. It would be perfect for a young couple just starting out." Zach chuckled. "We'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Leary. A house with a porch does sound appealing." "And room for children," the older woman added with a wink that made Sarah blush to the roots of her hair. Later, as they walked from the boarding house to the hotel, Sarah found herself imagining that house on Maple Street, imagining a life there with Zach, a life that might indeed include children someday. "You're smiling," Zach observed. "Care to share the thought?" Sarah slipped her arm through his, leaning into his warmth. "I was thinking about that house Mrs. Leary mentioned, about how it might feel to make a home there with you." Zach stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden light of the setting sun. "Is that what you want, Sarah? To make a home here, to build a life together in Republic, despite everything?" She nodded, more certain by the moment. "Yes, it feels right somehow, like completing a circle, returning to where we began, but as different people, stronger and together." She looked up at him. "I love you, Zachary Young, and I think we could be happy here, turning something tainted into something honest and good." The words, the first time she'd spoken them so directly, seemed to catch Zach off guard. Then his face softened into an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I love you too, Sarah Young," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible, and I believe we could be happy anywhere, as long as we're together." He cupped her face in his hands. "But making our home here, building something meaningful from the ashes of deceit, it feels like the right ending to this chapter of our story." He paused, his eyes holding hers with intensity. "Or rather, the right beginning to the next chapter." As his lips met hers in a kiss that promised a future filled with love and possibility, Sarah knew that the town that had gathered to witness her shame would now witness something far more powerful. A love that had been born in adversity, but would flourish in the light of truth. A partnership forged in the fire of injustice, but tempered by compassion and courage. The shame was gone, washed away by vindication and the promise of new beginnings. And in its place stood something beautiful and enduring. A love story that had started with the most unlikely of proposals, but would continue long after the scandal, was nothing more than a distant memory in the colorful history of Republic, Arizona territory. 5 years later, the town of Republic was transformed, no longer defined by corruption and scandal, but a thriving community known for honest governance and prosperous businesses. At the center stood Young's General Store, expanded now to include a pharmacy section, a book corner, and even a small area where travelers could sit and enjoy coffee while exchanging news. Behind the counter, Sarah Young balanced the day's accounts with practiced efficiency. At 37, Zachary Young still cut an impressive figure, though these days he was more likely to be found discussing inventory than chasing outlaws. The bell over the door jingled, and Sarah looked up to see Mrs. Leary entering, holding the hand of a small boy with dark hair and bright blue eyes. "There's Mama!" the child exclaimed, breaking free to run across the store. Sarah set aside her ledger just in time to catch the energetic 3-year-old. "Matthew James Young, what have you been doing with Mrs. Leary today?" "We baked cookies and fed the chickens and read a story about cowboys," Matthew reported breathlessly. And Mrs. Leary says I'm a natural helper because I didn't spill any flour this time. Sarah laughed, catching Mrs. Leary's eye. That is progress indeed. Thank you for watching him. Always a pleasure, the older woman assured her. He's a joy to have around. But he was most insistent we return before his sister wakes from her nap. As if on cue, soft crying came from the small room behind the counter where 16-month-old Elena napped in her cradle. That would be your sister now, Sarah said, kissing Matthew's forehead. Why don't you go tell Papa she's awake while I get her? Matthew nodded solemnly and darted off to find Zach, who was helping a customer in the hardware section. Sarah excused herself to attend to Elena, a beautiful little girl with her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. The baby's cries subsided as soon as she saw Sarah, transforming into happy gurgles. "Hello, my sweet girl," Sarah cooed, settling the child on her hip. "Did you have a good sleep?" Elena babbled a response, patting Sarah's cheek with a chubby hand. Sarah carried her back into the store, where Zach was now listening intently to Matthew's detailed report on his morning activities. "And then we saw a lizard by the garden, and Mrs. Leary says they eat bugs, which is good for the plants," Matthew was saying as Sarah approached. Zach looked up, his face softening into the expression of love and wonder that still appeared whenever he saw his wife and children together. 5 years into their marriage, that look still made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "There are my girls," he said warmly, reaching out to take Elena, who went to him willingly. "How was your morning, Mrs. Young?" "Very productive," Sarah confirmed. "The new inventory system is working beautifully, and Mr. Davidson from the bank stopped by about the loan for the expansion. He's approved it on the terms we requested." "Excellent news," Zach said, shifting Elena to one arm so he could wrap the other around Sarah's waist. "The new storeroom will give us the space we need." Young's General Store had flourished under their management, becoming not just the largest business in Republic, but one of the most respected establishments in the entire county. Their reputation for fair pricing and honest dealings had drawn customers from neighboring towns. Mrs. Leary beamed at the family before her. "Look at you four. Who would have thought when that handsome cowboy rode into town and declared he'd marry our Sarah rather than see her shamed that it would lead to all this?" "Certainly not me," Sarah admitted with a laugh. "I thought he was either mad or playing some game I didn't understand." "Whereas I knew exactly what I was doing," Zach countered, the teasing light in his eyes softened by genuine emotion. "Best decision I ever made, even if it was the most impulsive." The bell jingled again as more customers entered, and Zach reluctantly released Sarah to return to his duties. The busy afternoon passed quickly, the store humming with activity. When closing time finally arrived, the Young family prepared to walk the short distance to their home, the very house on Maple Street that Mrs. Leary had mentioned 5 years earlier, now filled with laughter, love, and the controlled chaos of 2 small children. As they strolled home in the gentle evening light, Matthew running ahead to chase grasshoppers while Zach carried a sleepy Elena, Sarah felt profound contentment wash over her. The path that had brought her here had been twisted and treacherous, marked by loss, fear, and injustice. Yet somehow it had led to this, to a life richer and more fulfilling than she'd ever dared imagine. "Penny for your thoughts," Zach said quietly, noticing her contemplative expression. Sarah smiled up at him. "I was just thinking about journeys, about how the most difficult paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." Zach nodded. "Do you ever regret it? Staying in Republic, I mean. We could have gone anywhere." "Never," Sarah said firmly. "This is where our story began, where you saved me, where I found the strength to fight back, where we fell in love." She took his free hand in hers. "The memories don't haunt me anymore, Zach. They're just part of our history, part of what made us who we are today." They reached their house with its wraparound porch, now adorned with hanging baskets of flowers and comfortable rocking chairs, where they often sat in the evenings watching the children play. "Papa, Mama, look at this pretty rock I found," Matthew called, running ahead. "It sparkles in the sun." Zack handed Elena to Sarah so he could properly admire his son's discovery, crouching down to examine the small piece of quartz with appropriate enthusiasm. Sarah watched them, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. From shame to salvation, from desperation to joy, her journey had been remarkable by any measure. And the most remarkable part was that it had led her here, to this moment, to this family that was her refuge and her strength. As the evening light bathed the scene in gold, Sarah offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought Zachary Young into her life that day in the town square. For his courage in standing up for a woman he didn't know. For his faith in her innocence when all others doubted. For the love that had grown between them, steady and true, transforming what had begun as an act of kindness into a lifetime of happiness. The town had gathered to watch her shame. But what they had witnessed instead was the beginning of a love story that would be told in Republic for generations, a testament to the power of truth, courage, and the heart's capacity for transformation even in the darkest of circumstances. And as Zack looked up from his conversation with Matthew, meeting her gaze with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all these years, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that their story was far from over. The best chapters were still being written, day by day, moment by moment, in the shared life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings. If you enjoyed Sarah and Zach's incredible journey from shame to salvation, don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories of courage, love, and justice, triumphing against all odds. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which twist surprised you most, and stay tuned, because the next story might be even more unbelievable than this one.